She braced for death at human hand, but his choice rewrote her destiny. We only recognize peace once we have survived its absence. The wind that day was not just cruel. It was precise, surgical. It sliced through fractured hulls and melted armor, as if the world itself had taken a side. Scattered across the crater were the remnants of Verani drop pods and shattered human walkers locked together like bones in a forgotten grave. A helmet cracked and half-buried still hissed with static. There was no heroism here, only residue, and she was still breathing, barely. Draven watched from behind the ruined arch of a downed transport frame. His breath misted against the inside of his scratched visor. The readings on his HUD flickered weakly. Radiation spikes, power drained, filters strained. Everything around him whispered one word: leave. Instead, he approached her. A Verani soldier, female, tall, muscular, even in the collapse of her form. Blood silver green and thick leaked from a wound in her thigh and soaked into the blackened snow beneath her. Her skin shimmered like oil under starlight. Elegant, unnatural. Her breathing was uneven but not defeated. Kael knelt beside her, not like a soldier about to finish a job, more like a man staring at the last echo of a question he had tried for years to stop asking. She didn't move. Her lips were chapped. One eyelid fluttered. He reached into his belt pouch, pulled out a nearly empty hydration pack, and held it near her mouth. "If you drink this and stab me later," he said quietly, "I'm going to be very annoyed." Her fingers twitched. That was it. Close enough to a yes. He pressed the nozzle gently to her lips, watching her throat convulse as she swallowed weakly. Her eyes slitted and, glowing faintly, didn't look at him. They looked through him. Kael exhaled slowly. "Guess that makes two of us." She passed out again, not for the last time. The outpost was 3 kilometers east, buried under wreckage, half-dead tech, and more ghosts than he could count. Kael carried her the whole way in silence, not for lack of thought, but because every time he opened his mouth, the only words that came up were the ones he had once sworn never to say again. He laid her on the cot in the hydroponic dome, covered her with a thermal wrap, tied her hands not tight, just enough to feel like he was still making smart decisions. Then he sat across from her. A half cup of synth brew warms his hands, the only light in the dome, coming from the soft green glow of the greenhouse panel behind him. She was Verani, that much was clear. Her skin held the iridescent sheen of their elite warriors. No insignia now. Her armor was scorched, her shoulder bare. But Kael recognized the pattern on what remained of her chest plate. Honor guard. He let out a low whistle. "Well, he said to no one in particular. I just carried royalty into my shack." The storm raged on outside, scraping against the dome like claws across a tomb. Inside, Kael's breath hung in the air like the ghosts of orders long disobeyed. By morning, the wind had quieted. Not gone, just waiting. She was awake. Kael opened his eyes and met hers. No fear in her stare, just calculation. He raised a hand in peace and nodded toward the cup beside her. Not poisoned, not drugged, and not free refills. She didn't move. He took a slow sip from his own mug, savoring the silence. "You're not standard infantry," he said after a while. "You were part of something else. Still nothing. Let me guess. You got tired of being told who to kill too." Her voice was dry as dust. "I was given an order to destroy a civilian vessel." "I said no." Kael blinked. The words sat heavy in the air between them. "They shot me for it," she continued. "Left me in the wreckage. Said I hesitated. Said hesitation was treason." Kael looked away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he replied softly, "I once refused to torch a relief shuttle full of wounded. My squad tried to bake me inside a dropship. They were very convincing." She tilted her head, studying him more closely now. "You are Black Echo." It wasn't a question. Kael gave a tired nod. "Was. I heard rumors. You cleaned up what command didn't want recorded." He gave a hollow laugh. "Yeah, and then I stopped. That was all. That was enough." That evening she sat unbound. Not because she earned trust, but because Kael knew what it looked like when someone had nothing left to run toward. Her name was still unspoken. Her story is only half formed. But she sat beside the hydroponic chamber, staring at the single tomato vine that hadn't bloomed in years. A husk, just like them. She touched her leg, flexed it gently. I owe you nothing, she said. Kael didn't look up. Good. That makes us even. Then he smiled just barely. She didn't smile back, but her voice softened. Why did you really save me? He thought about that. About fire, screams, orders barked through static. The way the boy on that transport screamed for his mother before it all went dark. Because the moment I pulled that trigger, he said, finally, I would have become someone I couldn't live with. The Verani warrior said nothing, but this time she did not look away. That night, as the wind picked up again and whistled like a warning through the dome, Kael dreamed of burning cities. He dreamed of metals melted into chains. He dreamed of a time before decisions had weight. And somewhere in the darkness, he dreamed of green eyes watching him quietly, not judging, just remembering. We don't say thank you here, not because we are cold, not because we lack manners, but because thanks implies something was given freely. In a world like this, nothing is free. Not kindness, not trust, not even survival. When Nyra stirred from her latest sleep, wrapped in the last thermal sheet Kael owned, he didn't greet her. He didn't ask how she felt. He simply placed a protein bar and a chip mug of reheated synth brew on the floor near her feet, then returned to scraping corrosion from the dome's backup regulator. The old generator behind him coughed in slow intervals, like it had forgotten how to breathe properly. Nyra sat up slow and stiff, her eyes scanning the space with precise calculation. Her gaze lingered on the nearest exit, then moved to the greenhouse panel and finally settled on the knife Kael had mounted near the bulkhead. She was awake now, fully present. You left me alive, she said. Kael did not look up. Yeah, and gave me food. Sut. He tapped the regulator with the butt of his wrench. That bar expired 4 years ago. Might kill you anyway. She sniffed it, then bit into it without flinching. He glanced over as she chewed, noting her expression. No disgust, no reaction. She had eaten worse, probably recently. After a pause, she set the wrapper down and looked at him directly. I am Nyra. Kael didn't answer right away. The name, soft and deliberate, hung in the air like a thread between them. It didn't burn, it didn't bite, but it stayed. Kael, he said finally. No title, no rank, no flag. She accepted that without question. No salute, no joke, just silence. Her eyes slid toward the tomato vine that sat near the grow lamps, its leaves withered and stubborn. You try to grow food in this place? Kael glanced at it. I will try. The vine disagrees. She tilted her head. So why keep it? He stared at the plant for a moment. Some things deserve the chance to fail more than once. For the first time, her lip curved slightly. Not a smile, but something near it. As night took the sky, Kael let her wander. The dome was small, but she made her rounds like she was inspecting a base after a firefight. She paused at the old comm station, tapped a few keys, and scowled at the static. The water recycler hissed behind her, half functional and groaning. When she reached the corner where Kael had hung a piece of armor, she stopped. It wasn't Verani, and it wasn't standard issue EarthTech either. It was darker, sleeker, marked not by symbols but by the absence of them. She turned to him slowly. You were Black Echo. Kael stood still. His face didn't change. She continued, voice low. They told stories in camp, silent units, full erasure squads, nothing left behind but smoke. Kael gave a short nod. That part was true. Her gaze held him. But you're not dead. No, because one time I didn't erase everything. He walked past her, picked up a half-empty bottle of grain alcohol, and poured 2 fingers into a dented cup. He didn't offer her any. She didn't ask. You want to know what they teach you in Black Echo? He said, his voice quiet. How to end a village in under 3 minutes. How to shut off every scream before it starts. What they don't teach is how to keep breathing afterward. She leaned back slightly, arms folded. The dome was quiet, save for the faint hum of the solar inverter. No one ever trained us for peace, she said. Kael raised the cup to his lips and drank. It burned less than it should have. Later, while they sat near the radio station eating a makeshift stew of protein paste and dry herbs, a burst of static cracked through the console. It was faint, glitchy, but Nyra reacted instantly. That's a ping, she said. Encrypted. Verani channel. Medical identifier. Kael leaned forward. From where? She typed rapidly. The signal spiked, then dipped again. Transport shuttle. Civilian coded. Might have survivors. Kael sighed. Which means it might also be bait. Nyra stared at the display. Her jaw tightened. I'm going. Kael folded his arms. And if it's a trap, then I'll know, she replied. But if it's not, then someone out there is dying while we argue. He hesitated. He didn't want to care. He really didn't. Nyra met his gaze. There was no pleading in her eyes, only purpose. You think you were the only one betrayed by orders? You think you're the only one who couldn't pull the trigger? I've buried friends too. Cal, don't make me bury strangers. He looked at the signal again, then grabbed his rifle. Fine, but if we die for someone already dead, I'm blaming you. You'll be dead. Exactly. The burned wastes stretched before them like a frozen graveyard. Snow mixed with chemical ash turned the landscape into a rust-colored skin. Every step triggered a warning in their visors. Radiation spikes. The air is too thin. Heat patches buried under cold layers that melted boots and made breathing a conscious act. But the signal held steady. The wreck lay tilted in a jagged, hollow nose, down one wing, snapped like a broken bird. Smoke curled from the engine vent. Kael led with his rifle drawn. Nyra moved in silence beside him. They breached the hull near the aft chamber. It was dark, still, no resistance. Then a cough, soft, weak. They froze. A child, wrapped in a foil blanket, breathing shallow, small hands trembling. Nyra knelt immediately. Kael checked the corner's pulse racing. He turned back in time to see Nyra freeze again. Kael, she whispered, look at him. The child was not fully Verani. His skin carried the faint green sheen, but his facial structure mirrored Kael's. Humans, almost. Half, Kael said. Mixed blood. Nyra's voice cracked. They'll kill him. Every faction will. Kael looked at the child, eyes half open, fingers twitching. A scar is already forming on his temple. Then we don't let them. They returned in silence, taking turns carrying the boy through the bitter wind. No one spoke of what he was, but both knew what he meant. He was not just a child. He was a statement that peace could exist, that blood did not have to be pure to be worthy, that sometimes the war loses. Snow in the burned wastes did not fall. It scraped. It sliced. Each gust of wind came with the bite of frozen ash, and it coated everything with a fine gray grit that clung to skin and memory alike. Kael trudged forward with the child strapped to his chest in a makeshift carrier made from his old cloak. Every 20 steps, he checked the boy's breathing. Still shallow, still there. Nyra walked behind one hand, never far from her blade. Her posture said watchfulness, but Kael could sense something else beneath it, a tremor in the way she scanned the ridgeline, a glance that lingered too long in the sky. You're expecting pursuit, Kael said without turning. I'm not expecting. I'm remembering, she replied. The last time I carried something precious away from a battlefield, they found me within the hour. Kael nodded once. Black Echo always said, if you hesitate, they'll find the blood before they find you. Nyra exhaled slowly. I didn't hesitate. I disobeyed. And they called that treason. Her voice turned sharp. They called it cleansing. That word left a bad taste in Kael's mouth. It always had. He'd heard it used too often as justification for things that could never be clean. A shadow passed overhead. Both of them stopped. Kael dropped to one knee, shielding the child with his body. Nyra crouched beside a rusted wreck, eyes searching the gray-white sky. A mechanical screech followed. Then came the sound. Low, throbbing. Kael's voice dropped to a whisper. Spectral unit. Close. 1 or 2. Kael listened. 1 for now, but it's scanning. There'll be more. Nyra cursed under her breath. If it sees the boy, it won't. Kael reached into his pack and pulled out a small jammer. It was old pre-conflict tech, the kind of tool that had gotten him marked as unreliable after he used it to cover the retreat of civilians instead of executing them. He powered it up. The device hummed faintly, then spat sparks. Nyra frowned. You trust that thing? Kael didn't answer. He just tucked it under the boy's blanket, tapped the activation node twice, and gestured to move. They pressed forward, climbing a shattered ridge of frost-caked stone. On the other side was a narrow pass, too narrow for a spectral hound to follow without ground support. "We hole up past the rocks," Kael said. "If it tracks by heat, we'll vanish inside the vent shafts. And if it tracks by sound," Kael glanced at her, "then we stop breathing." They made it inside with minutes to spare. The vent shaft was ancient, likely part of an old geothermal network from before the wars. Nyra sealed the entrance with melted scrap and snow. Kael propped the boy on a bed of thermal wraps, checking his pulse again. It was faster, stronger. Maybe the child wasn't as close to death as they feared, or maybe being close to something human kept him alive longer. Kael didn't say it out loud. Nyra might not have appreciated the sentiment. Instead, he sat down across from her in the narrow cave and took a long breath. "You know what that drone means, right?" he asked. Nyra gave a tired nod. "Voss knows. He knows someone didn't die as ordered." Kael looked into the dim light reflecting off the frost-coated walls. "I thought I buried that part of me in the sand on Revan's ditch. Guess it clawed back up." Nyra shifted closer to the boy and wrapped a second cloth around him. Her voice was quiet, almost distant. "Voss sent spectrals into a refugee sector once. Said they were testing adaptive pathfinding. No survivors, no remains." Kael grimaced. "No proof either." "Not yet." She looked at him then. "You said your unit burned villages." Kael didn't flinch. "I said I walked away from it. Did you carry any evidence?" His silence was answer enough. She leaned in. Her eyes for the first time held urgency. "If we make it to the old tower near Vorgan Canyon, we can uplink a broadcast." Kael's brows furrowed. "That place has been dead for a decade, fried in the first orbital wave. The signal relay still exists underground, deep enough to avoid the EMPs." He hesitated. "That's a long way through hostile land, carrying a kid everyone wants to erase." "And no one else can do it," Nyra said simply. The words hung between them like a dare. Hours passed. The boy stirred. Eyes open, just a slit of awareness. He didn't speak, but he reached one small hand toward Kael's chest fingers, brushing the old badge stitched into his cloak. Kael looked down, then back at the boy. "No one wears that anymore," he murmured. Nyra's voice was soft. "He doesn't know what it means. That might be the only reason he's still alive." Kael reached into his kit, pulled out a cracked lens tablet, and powered it up. The screen flickered to life, displaying an old image. A field hospital on fire. A medic screaming. A boy shielding his sister. The child in Kael's arms wasn't in that image, but the guilt still found him. "He reminds you of someone," Nyra said. Kael nodded slowly. "He reminds me of what I couldn't save." They didn't speak for a while. Outside, the wind moved like something hunting. Inside, the silence curled around them, heavy and thick. By morning, the spectral unit had passed. Its tracks were shallow in the snow but precise. Kael knew it had scanned the area. Probably detected heat, but the jammer had worked. For now. They moved again at dawn. Nyra led this time. She was faster, more sure-footed across the ravines and dry riverbeds. Kael carried the boy and kept his eyes on the horizon. Ahead, smoke. Not black, not military, soft and brown. "Campfire," Nyra muttered. Kael adjusted his grip on the child. "Could be scavengers. Could be the outer crater folk." Kael raised a brow. "I thought they were a myth." "Most things worth finding start that way." She gave him a small grin, one that didn't reach her eyes but tried. And for the first time, Kael found himself smiling back. Not because the danger had passed, but because in that moment between the ash and cold, something had shifted. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about what came after. The smoke curled lazily, almost hesitant in its rise. Unlike the sharp, choking black trails of orbital wreckage, this smoke smelled of old wood and moss. A fire meant intention, shelter, or a trap. Kael crouched low behind a crumbled outcrop of stone, his arms aching under the weight of the child. The boy was lighter than he should have been, malnourished, fragile, but still warm, still breathing. Nyra scanned the ridge ahead with narrowed eyes. Her voice barely reached Kael's ears. "Do you see it?" He nodded once. "Makeshift canopy. Someone strung a fusion mesh between the trees." Nyra's expression stayed neutral, but her stance shifted subtly. She was tense. "Could be scavengers," she said. Could be worse, Kael muttered. Could be optimists. Nyra gave him a side glance. You say that like it's a threat. In a place like this, Kael replied, it usually is. They advanced slowly each step, careful on the brittle ground. The smoke led them into a hollow and old crater softened by time and covered in uneven snowdrifts. Beneath a camouflaged dome sat two weather-beaten tents, a stacked pile of cut wood, and a long-limbed figure poking at a fire. Verani, or close enough. Kael's hand went to his sidearm. Nyra raised her hand. Wait. The figure looked up. Old, gray-frilled tendrils along the scalp, eyes milky but alert. Put the weapons down, the voice rasped, unless you're planning to shoot an old cook in his boiling water. Kael didn't lower his weapon. The man stood anyway, hands visible, slow. You're not the first ghost to come stumbling out of the burn line, he said, but you are the first who looks like you still know what day it is. Nyra stepped forward. Your crater resistance. The man's grin showed 3 teeth and a lot of sarcasm. I was. Now I'm just too stubborn to die in the cold. Kael studied at the camp. No signs of active surveillance, no decoys. Just 3 sleeping bags and a crude antenna buried under frozen soil. You alone, the man chuckled. Me a fire and my memories. But if you want to count ghosts, I've got plenty of those too. Nyra lowered her stance first. We need shelter and information. And I need someone to eat the stew before it turns into paste. He waved them closer. So we're all in luck. An hour later, the child was asleep inside the warmer of the 2 tents curled between salvaged insulation and Kael's cloak. His breathing had steadied. Color was returning to his cheeks. Kael stirred the pot as Nyra spoke with the old man, whose name was Dren. He had been a Verani field medic during the early siege years, had walked away after the bombings at Lorith Outpost. According to him, he had seen enough organs outside bodies to decide the war wasn't worth anyone's loyalty anymore. They started calling us defectors, Dren said, hunched near the fire. But I never defected. I just stopped pretending loyalty was worth blood. Nyra nodded slowly. Have you heard of Voss's movements? Too much. Too close. That man still runs his campaigns like the war never ended. Cleansing units. Tactical denial zones. He calls it peacekeeping now. Kael grunted. He sent a spectral unit through the ridge. We barely avoided it. Dren's eyes narrowed. Then you've got less than 3 days. That sector will go hot. They always double back if they don't find remains. Kael looked at Nyra. She looked back. Vorgan Canyon wasn't going to wait. They had to move soon. Later, as the stars crept across the smoke-streaked sky, Kael sat beside the child, keeping watch, while Nyra rested inside the tent. The fire crackled quietly. Dren dozed with a mug in hand. The boy stirred. Kael adjusted the wrap around him, checking his forehead. No fever. Still improving. Then for the first time the child opened his eyes fully. Bright, unnatural. Verani pupils with human whites. Twin legacies staring up at Kael without fear. You're safe, Kael whispered, almost unsure whether he was saying it for the boy or himself. The boy reached up small fingers, brushing the old black echo patch still sewn into Kael's sleeve. Kael froze. That patch had once meant death, erasure, silence. Now it was being touched by something that defied everything it had once stood for. He slowly unclipped the badge, stared at it for a moment, then slipped it into the child's pack. You don't need to carry my past, he said quietly, but maybe one day you'll understand it. By morning, Nyra was already packing. The broadcast tower isn't just a relay point, she explained as they strapped the child into a reinforced sling across Kael's back. It holds records, partial logs, things Voss thought were destroyed. Kael's brow furrowed. You think they survived the EMP bursts? Deep storage modules were protected, buried in substructure, and you can access them. I had top clearance before I was erased. Dren handed Kael a wrapped bundle. It's not a weapon, he said. It's evidence. Logs I recovered before they shut down our medic lines. Names, coordinates, faces. If you can get it out. Kael accepted the package silently. Nyra looked at Dren. Thank you, he shrugged. Don't thank me yet. You still have to make it there alive. As they left the camp, Dren raised a hand in farewell, but said nothing more. He didn't offer hope. I hope the currency is too expensive out here. Kael didn't look back. He had learned long ago that the best way to honor someone who gives you a chance is to use it without wasting time. The road to Vorgan was jagged, not in the literal sense, although the terrain was no friend to boots or lungs, but in the way the past came back in flashes. The boy cried once during the climb. Kael hushed him without words, just steady hands, and a quiet hum he didn't know he still remembered. Nyra walked ahead, never looking back but always listening. At one point she stopped abruptly. "What is it?" Kael asked. She crouched, brushed snow aside. A symbol, faded but unmistakable. Verani war crest, marked into the stone. Kael's mouth tightened. "They claim this path." Nyra stood slowly. "Then we unclaim it." She wiped the mark away with a rock until it was gone. That night they reached the canyon's edge. The tower stood in the distance, a jagged silhouette against a bruised sky. Lights long dead, antennas broken like the ribs of some ancient beast. Kael looked at it and felt nothing. He had expected fear, or dread, or the old anger, but instead he felt stillness. Maybe that was what came when you finally stopped running from everything except the truth. "Tomorrow," Nyra said softly. "Tomorrow," Kael agreed. They set up camp in the shadow of the tower, and for the first time the child slept without crying. The tower loomed like a forgotten god. Its skeleton stood against the ash-hued sky, all steel and silence. Twisted antenna arrays clawed at the clouds, broken and scorched, blackened from the orbital sweeps that ended the war. Beneath its base, the canyon whispered with cold wind, dry, hollow. Nothing alive had passed through in years. Kael stood at the ridge, one hand resting gently on the boy's back. The child had stopped stirring. Whether from exhaustion or trust, Kael didn't know. Maybe both. Nyra approached from the left carrying a small bag of sensors she had salvaged from the resistance camp. Her breath was controlled, but her eyes betrayed the tension underneath. "Sub-level hatch should be near the southeast venting shaft," she said. "We'll have to cut through the lower wall. The main doors are sealed by rust and time." Kael gave a slight nod. "What are we expecting inside? Decay, heat pockets, maybe automated defenses if any cores still trickle power." "Ah," Kael's jaw tightened. "And if Voss set traps after the fall?" Nyra looked him dead in the eye. "Then we bleed carefully." That was as close to optimism as either of them allowed. They descended cautiously. The outer struts had collapsed inward, forming a jagged path of rebar and debris. Kael went first, carving footholds into the icy metal with his boot blade. Nyra followed close, carrying the boy during the steeper climb, her movement sure and quiet. At the lower tier, they found a sealed maintenance door, half buried under frost and broken girders. Nyra knelt beside it, scanning the access panel with a small handheld interface. Corrupted, but the wiring is intact. Kael stood behind her eyes, scanning the horizon. "We've got maybe 6 hours before the spectrals double back. Then let's not waste them." She pried open the panel fingers, moving fast, cutting and rerouting old wires with muscle memory born of military training. Sparks flew once, then again. The lock clunked, hesitated, then hissed. The door slid open. Behind it, darkness, and the smell of dust and coolant. The sub-level interior was preserved in a kind of frozen decay. Shelves buckled under the weight of time. Old terminals blinked with dying life, still loyal to commands issued a decade ago. Kael swept the room first, checking corners, clearing corners with practiced precision. No movement, no traps. Nyra moved to the central column. Her fingers danced over the surface, wiping away grime until a screen responded. Text scrolled slowly across. "Archive node. Restoring." Kael looked over her shoulder. "You really think this is going to matter?" Nyra didn't look away. "I think Voss's version of the war has ruled the Council too long, and I think truth once seen cannot be unseen." The screen blinked again, then filled with data blocks, hundreds of files, most encrypted, many incomplete, but not all. They spent hours extracting fragments, videos, recon logs, command audio. Voss's voice clear and damning, ordering operations under the guise of humanitarian aid. Designations for civilian sectors. Use of spectral units without identification tags. Kyle's face grew harder with each file. Nyra's hands shook once, only once, when a recovered clip showed a Verani dropship targeting a medical convoy. Her old squad's crest marked on the hull. "I was there," she said quietly. Kyle didn't respond. He placed a hand on her shoulder instead. Not as comfortable. Just a reminder that she wasn't the only one carrying it. The final file came from a corrupted log titled Operation Clean Verge. Kyle opened it. Inside, they found thermal footage from a Black Echo insertion. His old unit, his own face. A timestamp and location burned into the corner. The voice giving the order wasn't his commander, it was Voss. "Eliminate all witnesses. No exceptions. This includes Echo personnel who hesitate." Cal stared at the screen. Nyra exhaled slowly. "They burned you before you disobeyed." Kyle closed his eyes. "I was never meant to make it out." Silence settled again. This time it didn't sting. With the files uploaded into the old relay's broadcast matrix, they prepared the manual uplink. No encryption, no firewalls, just a raw, bleeding pulse of memory. Cal flipped the final switch. "How long until it goes live?" Nyra checked the readout. 2 minutes. They stood back. No speech, no ceremony. Just two soldiers surrounded by dust and guilt, waiting for the truth to scream. The screen flashed green. "Transmission sent, confirmation received, relay network partial restoration." And somewhere beyond the canyons, beyond the snow and stars, someone now knew. Back at the surface, the sky looked different. Still gray, still cold, but lighter, like the weight of lies had shifted. Kyle stood beside the tower scanning the horizon. The spectrals had not come yet, but they would. Nyra placed her hand on the boy's back as he slept again, curled inside the sling. "We just made ourselves targets," she said. Kyle nodded. "Good. Good. If someone's aiming at us, it means they're not erasing someone else." Nyra didn't reply, but she smiled, just slightly, and for the first time Kael did too. They stayed one more night, not out of comfort, but because the tower was silent and broken, deserved company after all it had witnessed. Kyle kept watch. Nyra slept with one hand resting on the child's foot, and above them, satellites long thought dead began to stir. Bits of old data found new breath, and in the cracks between history and silence, truth had taken root. Kael had known fear in many forms. The whine of a charged plasma bolt inches from his skull, the hollow click of a dry magazine, the moment before breaching a dark corridor with no recon feed and no backup. But none of those matched the quiet fear he felt walking through the open snow with a child strapped to his back and a target drawn across his spine. They had broadcast the truth. Now the question was who had heard it, and who wanted them dead for it. Nyra moved silently beside him. Her posture had changed, not the confident, precise flow of a Verani honor guard. This was different, protective. Her shoulders slightly turned toward the child. Her eyes scanned the trees, the sky, the ground. Always a step ahead, always listening. Kael noticed it but said nothing. Some things didn't need to be spoken. Instead, he pointed to the jagged horizon ahead. 2 clicks to the mouth of Vorgan Canyon. The terrain's rough. "We take the eastern slope, avoid open ridges." Nyra nodded. "We'll need shelter tonight. The boy needs real rest." Kyle glanced down at the bundle behind him. The child had slept through most of the journey, but his breathing was shallow again. The cold was taking its toll. "He won't survive another chase," Kael muttered. Nyra's voice was tight. "Then we make sure there isn't one." The canyon edge was a skeleton of broken machines. Old war platforms, long rusted, jutted from the cliffside like grave markers. Abandoned tanks, drones half buried in snow. The ghosts of battles no one remembered except those who couldn't forget. They made camp under the twisted frame of a walker's leg. Cal lit a small heat disk. Nyra reinforced the wind barrier with scavenged tarp. Together they worked like people who had done this before too many times. But this time felt different, because now they weren't just hiding from death, they were protecting life. Kael stared into the heat glow as Nyra fed the boy warm broth, coaxing him to swallow. The child's eyes fluttered open once, and Kael caught a flicker of understanding. Recognition, not of faces or names, but of safety. He looked at Nyra. Her face was calm, but her hands trembled slightly as she wiped the child's mouth. He reminds me of my little brother, she said quietly. Kael said nothing, just listened. He used to follow me around the barracks. I always thought I was a hero before I got promoted, before I saw what that meant. She looked up. They told me my duty was above emotion, that love made you weak. But when they gave me the order to level that village, I saw my brother's face in every window. Kael stirred the fire slowly. The sound of the flame filled the silence between them. They made me watch as the others did it, said I needed to learn obedience, said I hesitated. Her voice cracked. They were right, I did. Kael didn't respond, not with words. He just took another log, set it in the flame, and let it burn with her memory. By midnight, the wind had changed. Kael felt it first. A stillness, then a hum. Low, mechanical. Nyra froze. Her eyes snapped toward the ridge. Spectrals. Kael stood. We've got minutes. She grabbed her rifle. Kael lifted the boy and wrapped him in the thickest layers they had. He handed the bundle to her. Run. She looked at him sharply. No. They want me. I was Black Echo. I uploaded the data. Voss will want to silence me personally, and if you die, the child loses both of us. Kael hesitated. That was the part he hadn't let himself admit. She was right, but there was no time to argue. The first drone cresting the ridge solved the debate. It stood still for a moment, its dark frame outlined against the faint moonlight. Then it moved, fast, silent, deadly. Kael fired first. 3 rounds center mass. The hound didn't fall, but it staggered. Nyra shot next. A precision burst to its right sensor. Sparks flew. The unit stumbled and recalibrated. They had seconds. Kael turned. Go now. Nyra moved, not running, but positioning. Cover fire. She was buying time. Another drone emerged, then a third. Kael launched a flare. The sudden burst of light disoriented the units for a breath-long window. EMP, he shouted. Now Nyra slammed a small charge into the ground, activating the pulse. The canyon shuddered with shock. The drones twitched violently. 2 collapsed. The third sparked and convulsed before falling into the snow smoke curling from its joints. Silence followed. Kael's ears rang. He blinked through the haze and turned. Nyra was on one knee, blood dripping from her shoulder. The child was still clutched to her chest. Kael ran to them. You're hit. It's a scratch. You're bleeding. It's a scratch. He looked at her. She looked at the child. Neither one let go. They didn't sleep that night. They set trip lines, readied charges, watched the sky. The boy lay between them, wrapped in warmth they could barely afford. And in that small pocket of exhausted quiet, Kael whispered something he hadn't said in years. Thank you, Nyra looked over. We don't say that here, Kael smiled. I know. She didn't respond, but the way she leaned slightly toward him said enough. By dawn, no new drones appeared. The wind returned, gentler, carrying dust instead of blades. Kael stood at the canyon's edge and looked down. Vorgan opened before him like the mouth of something ancient and deep, a place where history had bled out and been forgotten. Nyra joined him. We're not done yet, she said. No, but we're not running anymore either. Kael nodded. Then they turned and began the descent into the place where the final choice waited. Not a battlefield, but something far more dangerous. A future. The descent into Vorgan Canyon was like walking into the bones of a dead giant. Cliffs rose around them, steep and black-veined with ancient metal. Broken beams jutted from the walls like ribs. There were no birds, no wind, just the crunch of Kael's boots. Nyra's careful steps and the distant breath of old machines that still hadn't accepted they were obsolete. Kael carried the child. Nyra led the way. The further they went, the quieter it became. The sound fell flat. The canyon swallowed every word. Eventually, they stopped speaking altogether. They reached the old Verani outpost just before midday. It had been gutted long ago. Steel plates melted into slag. Towers caved inward. But beneath the wreckage, deep in the cooling ducts and power corridors, the skeleton of the place remained intact. This used to be a forward medical command, Nyra whispered, running her fingers across a faded panel. Kael glanced around. I don't see bodies. They were dissolved. Kael didn't ask how she knew that. He didn't want to know. Instead, they found an opening along the west flank of an emergency hatch half covered in shale. Kael handed Nyra the child while he pried it open. The inside reeked of rust and oil. Darkness pressed in like a second skin. Once inside, they moved fast. Through old triage rooms and shattered supply vaults, past broken beds and melted tiles. Everywhere they looked, something had once mattered. Now only silence remained. Kael spotted the control hub first. A cracked door, a burnt-out identifier strip. But the frame still hummed faintly. He stepped through and stopped. Screens lined the walls. Dead. Some still show frozen text in the Verani script. A data core blinked slowly in the center, like a pulse fading, but refusing to die. Nyra set the child down gently in a corner, wrapped tight in insulation. Then she turned to Kael. "This is where it happened." Kael didn't ask. She had that look again. The one people get when standing on the grave of something they once believed in. "They told us this place fell to a reactor leak," she said, "but it wasn't an accident." She stepped forward, wiping dust from one of the consoles. "I was stationed here," she whispered, "for a week, before the order came." Kael stayed silent. Sometimes silence was the only way to honor the dead. They told us to evacuate, but only us, not the patients, not the staff. Her hand clenched. I asked why. They said it was classified, a cleansing procedure. Said the wounded were compromised. Said they were a risk to Verani integrity. Kael felt a pressure in his chest. Not anger, not horror, just a cold, familiar confirmation. He had heard the same words too, in different accents, on different worlds. He knew what came next. They locked the doors from orbit, she continued, then sent down drones with incendiary payloads. She pointed to a panel near the floor. I hid under there. The only reason I'm alive is because I disobeyed. Kael crossed the room slowly. He put a hand on her shoulder. She didn't shake it off. They powered the console using a spare battery from Kael's kit. Nyra rerouted what was left of the internal grid, coaxing life from burnt wires and shattered fuses. A screen flickered, then another. Files, logs, medical entries. Kael scanned the directories. Most were partials. Some had corrupted timestamps. But the names, they were real. He tapped one. A video file opened. A Verani doctor stared into the camera. She was mid-sentence. Requesting evacuation clearance for Sector 12. Radiation exposure has compromised containment protocols. We still have 200 patients. Please respond. The feed cut out. Nyra swallowed. That was the last one. She kept trying. No one answered. Kael clicked to the next, and the next. Each one told the same story. Abandonment, silence, then fire. Kael exhaled slowly. This needs to be seen. Nyra nodded. We can't use the tower again. Voss will be watching every open relay. Then we need something harder to trace. She tapped a side console. I can reroute through the resistance bands. They've got sub-channel encryption. It'll take longer, but it'll hit the outer worlds first. Kael raised an eyebrow. Less likely to be blocked. More likely to spread before they can bury it. Kael looked at her. You're good at this. I was a communications officer before they gave me a rifle. He gave a short laugh. Figures. They worked quickly side by side. Patch cords, signal filters, timing delays. Every part of Kael wanted to believe this would matter, that someone out there would watch these files and care. But the war had taught him better. Truth alone didn't change things. What changed things was what people were willing to do after hearing it. Still, they had to try. As the first batch of files began transmitting, a faint beeping echoed from Kael's sat-link. He checked the display. Movement. Nyra? She turned. They're coming, he said. How many 2 dropships? Military signature. Not ours. Nyra stiffened. Voss sent an extraction team. Kael checked the charge on his rifle. They know where we are. She stared at the screen. The data hadn't finished uploading. Stall them, she said. Kael didn't argue, he just nodded. Then picked up his rifle, looked back once at the child, and stepped into the hallway. The canyon echoed with the sound of descending ships. Kael took position behind a scorched beam, scanning the shadows. He spotted the first figure as it exited the dropship. Sleek armor, Verani elite, pulse rifle gleaming. Behind them, 2 more. Kael didn't wait. He fired. One went down. The others scattered. Return fire hit the wall beside him, spraying him with fragments. He rolled, came up behind a collapsed pipe, and fired again. He didn't aim to kill, just to delay. Inside, Nyra monitored the transmission. The signal was holding. Barely. Her fingers flew over the console, rerouting when necessary. She didn't flinch at the sounds of gunfire echoing from the hallway. Only once did she look over her shoulder. The child hadn't woken, still curled in warmth, still unaware of the war clawing at the door. Nyra turned back to the console and kept the truth alive. Outside, Kael ducked as a blast scorched the wall behind him. He was bleeding now. Arm, leg. It didn't matter. He had one goal: hold them off long enough, just long enough. As he reloaded, he caught sight of something else. Another figure, not armored, not carrying a weapon, just watching from behind the dropship ramp. Kael squinted. It was Voss, older, wearing a polished command coat, untouched by the frost. He stood with arms crossed, like this was a routine inspection. Kael gritted his teeth. Of course Voss had come. He wouldn't trust anyone else to clean this up. Back inside, Nyra stared at the countdown. 90%. Come on. Outside, Kael stood up, shoulders straight, rifle down. He stepped out from behind cover and locked eyes with the man who had turned soldiers into weapons and truth into treason. Voss raised an eyebrow. You look tired, Draven. Kael gave a bloodied smile. Funny, I was about to say the same. Then he reached for the detonator hidden in his glove. Voss's eyes narrowed, but it was already too late. The blast rolled through the canyon like thunder dragged from the lungs of the dead. It wasn't a big explosion. Kael had rigged it that way. Controlled, measured, just enough to collapse the entry point, scatter the spectrals, and bury Voss's strike team under a blanket of fire and steel. But it was loud. Loud enough to tell anyone within 100 clicks that someone still refused to kneel. Inside the control chamber, Nyra flinched at the vibration. Dust fell from the ceiling in sheets. Lights blinked in protest. The upload froze for a moment, then resumed. 92%. She breathed out, still alive. She didn't need to check the feed. She knew it. Somehow, Kael wouldn't die from one explosion. Not yet. She turned back to the console. Her fingers worked the uplink. Encrypt, repeat, split packets, disperse across the web like spores. Everything Voss had tried to burn, she would scatter to the stars. Outside, Kael crawled from the rubble, coughing blood. His left arm didn't respond. Shoulder dislocated, ribs cracked, something sharp in his side. But he was alive. He forced himself up. Around him, silence again. The spectrals were down, either crushed or disabled. The strike team gone, buried. Only twisted fragments of armor and scorched stone remained, except for one. Voss. Of course. He emerged from behind a fallen girder, limping slightly, his coat torn and singed. A plasma pistol dangled in his hand. Kael raised his rifle. Voss smiled faintly. Out of charge. I counted. Kael's rifle clicked uselessly. Voss gestured to the side with his pistol. That little stunt cost me 3 command units. You always were an artist in demolition. Kael didn't reply. His legs shifted, slightly bracing. Voss stepped closer. Do you think this matters? A few files, a broadcast. Kael stared at him. It's not about the files. Voss raised an eyebrow. No, it's about the fact that you came here personally, Kael said. That you're not hiding behind codes and ranks anymore. You're standing in the dirt. With me. Voss's expression darkened. Kael took a step forward. That tells me you're scared. That tells me you know the truth's already out. Voss laughed once. Sharp, bitter. You're a relic Draven. So is that alien you're dragging through the snow. So is your war orphan. Symbols don't change anything. Kael's eyes locked on him. Then why are you bleeding? Voss didn't answer, but his hand tightened on the pistol. Kael didn't move. Go ahead, he said quietly. Shoot me. But you'll still have to explain why a civilian broadcast from a decommissioned outpost included your voice ordering the sterilization of refugee camps. Voss's face twitched. You were always a problem, he said. No, Kael replied. I was a mirror. You just didn't like what you saw. The pistol rose. Kael didn't flinch. A shot rang out. Voss staggered, dropping his weapon. He clutched his side eyes wide with disbelief. Behind him, Nyra lowered her rifle. "I told you we weren't done," she said. Kael exhaled, a long, painful breath. Nyra stepped forward, the boy still secured against her chest. Her shoulder was bandaged hastily. Her eyes were on fire. Voss collapsed to his knees. Blood soaked into the canyon floor. Nyra stood over him. "You said love makes us weak," she said softly. "But it's the only reason we're still alive." Voss looked up at her. His mouth opened, then closed. He fell forward and did not move again. They burned what was left of the wreckage, not out of anger, out of necessity. No more spectrals, no more dropships, no more orders. Just the cold wind of Vorgan Canyon blowing across the last breath of a failed empire. That night, Kael sat against a stone wall staring at the stars through the collapsed ceiling. His wounds ached, his vision blurred, but he was still breathing. Nyra sat beside him, the boy between them. No fire, just body heat and silence. The child was sleeping, head against Kael's side. Kael spoke first. "You could have left." Nyra didn't look at him. "So could you." He chuckled. Then I winced. "We're both terrible at running." She smiled faintly. "That's why we survived." For a long time, neither of them said anything. Then Kael reached into his coat and pulled out a small scorched data crystal. He held it between his fingers. "Voss had this on him," he said. "Encrypted, untouched." Nyra took it, examined it. She recognized the seal. "That's a contingency file. Command protocol override." Kael raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" She looked at him. "It means there are still people in high command who supported him. This war isn't over." "Not really." Kael leaned his head back against the wall. "Then I guess we will keep walking." In the morning, they buried Voss in the canyon. No words, no marker, just a pile of stone. They didn't do it for him. They did it so no one would ever dig him up again. They left the outpost behind. Kael carried the child. Nyra walked beside them. No destination, only direction, toward wherever the signal had reached, toward whoever had listened. And somewhere out there across the dark, someone would ask, who were they two survivors? A deserter, a traitor, and a child born from the blood of two enemies. The beginning of something new. They didn't become legends overnight. No one builds myths from broken people hauling a half-frozen child across salt-scarred plains, eating protein paste, and praying the air filters don't clog. There were no orchestras, no monument lighting, just footsteps in ash one after another towards something that might still be out there. Kael knew the silence was no longer just nature. It was calculated. After the broadcast, the galaxy had gone quiet, not because it hadn't heard, but because it didn't know how to respond. When you shine a light on a massacre, no one wants to be the first to speak, especially not the ones who profited from silence. They found the resistance camp buried beneath the ridge near Kaltras Basin. Nyra spotted the glint of solar shielding first. Kael smelled the recycled air second. They followed the faint trail of warmth into a gorge choked with icicles and rockfall. A sentry challenged them 3 minutes later. The child's presence changed the outcome. "You're the ones from the tower," the sentry said, voice hushed like he had met ghosts. We saw the transmission. I thought it was a trick." Kael tilted his head. "Then you don't know Voss." The man led them in. No questions, just quiet stares. As if every rebel in that camp had been holding their breath for a decade, and the sight of two people who dared speak truth finally allowed them to exhale. They stayed 3 days. Long enough for Nyra's wounds to close properly. Long enough for the boy to be seen by a real medic who wept when she realized what he was. "They've been telling us hybrids can't survive past infancy," she whispered. "They said the blood war was genetic." Kael didn't reply, but Nyra did. They lied. Kael helped reinforce the perimeter during the second night, fused broken drone parts into early warning alarms, rewired a rusted comms panel into a shortwave jammer. He didn't speak much, but the resistance folk didn't push. They recognized him, not by name but by silence, by the way he moved, like someone who had seen every version of the wrong thing and still kept walking. A woman named Thalyn approached him during the final watch. She was tall, older than him, with burn scars across one side of her jaw. "You're not staying, are you?" Kael shook his head. She nodded, as if she'd known. Why Kael watched the stars? Because we did what we came to do. And the rest, that's not our fight. Thalyn tilted her head. Looks like it could be. He looked at her then. Tired. Honest. We're tired of being symbols. The next morning the Resistance offered them transport. Kael declined. Nyra accepted a data shard. It contained proof of Allied leaders requesting deniable interventions under Voss's direction. The data, if released, would ignite more than awareness. It would start purges, shatter alliances, end careers. Kael weighed it in his hand, then slid it into his coat. He didn't say no, but he didn't say when. They left the camp quietly. No farewells, just nod. A few hands on shoulders, a murmur of thank you that neither Kael nor Nyra acknowledged aloud. Because they didn't say thank you. Not here, not anymore. They walked until their legs burned again, until the stars shifted, until the dust gave way to red earth and iron grass. They passed through an abandoned mining colony, its lights flickering with solar decay. They found shelter in an old fuel station stripped of anything valuable, but still solid against the wind. That night the boy spoke for the first time. A single word. Warm. Kael froze. He looked at Nyra. She blinked, stunned. Her mouth opened, then closed. Yes, she said. You're safe now. The boy didn't say anything else, but he didn't need to. Kael sat outside after they fell asleep, watching the broken moon hang low over the horizon. He thought about the crystal in his coat, about the other names, the other crimes. He knew he could bring it all down, the whole rotten structure, but he also knew what would happen next. Blood, retaliation, collapse. He took the shard out, held it in his palm. It glimmered faintly under the moonlight. Then he slid it back into his coat. Not yet. There was still more walking to do. In the morning, Nyra stood beside him holding a canteen and a ration bar. We could stop, she said. Kael didn't answer. She handed him the food anyway. They walked. No destination, just a path. Maybe toward a future that didn't need saviors. Only people willing to carry the weight. And maybe that was enough. They didn't call it running anymore. Not even walking. It was just moving. From one forgotten town to another. From cratered fields to dust-blown passes. The war had chewed so much of the planet that direction barely mattered. North or south, east or west, everything looked like bones. Kael and Nyra never said where they were going. That wasn't the point. The point was to keep the child safe, to make sure the galaxy remembered what it tried to erase. A boy born of two enemies, still breathing, still human, still Verani, still alive. It was in a place called Vestal Hollow that the world tried to kill them again. The settlement had once been a repair yard housing miners and tech hands. Now it was a ghost wrapped in scaffolding. Drones circled above, broken but watching. Signs of a recent military sweep still burned into the stone. Kael stepped through first. He saw the burned-out shuttles, the empty bunks, the shattered med station. Then he saw the bodies. Not many. Just enough. Enough to know it had been a warning, not a massacre. The message was clear. This is what happens when you host ghosts. Nyra cradled the child tighter. He had stopped asking questions. He had stopped speaking altogether. His silence was different from theirs. It was not built on guilt. It was built on fear. Kael looked around the square. They came through fast, clean strike, pulse weapons. Nyra scanned the rooftops. But they didn't take the bodies. They wanted someone to find this. Kael nodded slowly. Then let's not give them the satisfaction. They didn't stop scavenging. Didn't set camp. They moved on. The path out of Vestal Hollow took them through a ravine laced with shattered comm towers. It was there they encountered the tracker. Not a soldier, not a drone. Just a man. Half-augmented eyes replaced with gleaming metal irises. His coat marked him as a freelance pursuer. Mercenary, maybe. Possibly worse. He stepped from behind a ridge with a scanner in one hand and a stun rod in the other. I'm not here to fight, he said. Kael raised his rifle anyway. I'm here to talk, the tracker added. Name's Lorik. I was hired to find you. Not kill you. Nyra didn't move. Then walk away. Lorik smiled faintly. I could. But the people who hired me are going to send others. Less polite. Kael narrowed his eyes. Who sent you? Lorik shrugged. Not Voss. He's dead. but his doctrine still alive. Somewhere out there, people are still funding the old ideas. They want the boy. Kael's finger tightened on the trigger. I said, I'm not here for him, Lorik said quickly. I'm here to deliver a message. From someone else. He reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a chip. Kael gestured with the muzzle. Toss it. Lorik obeyed. The chip landed in the dirt. Kael retrieved it, slid it into his datapad and scanned it. Encrypted. Old code. He recognized the signature. Resistance. Nyra stepped forward. Who gave you this? Lorik hesitated. A woman named Thalyn. She said you'd understand. Kael looked at Nyra. She nodded once. What's the message? Kael asked. Simple, Lorik said. They need you, now. They set up camp that night beneath a collapsed freight bridge. Kael decrypted the message in silence. Thalyn's voice crackled through distorted but clear. If you're hearing this, the council is moving. Fast. They're spinning your broadcast into propaganda, saying it was deep fake, that you're separatists trying to reignite the war. We've tried countering the narrative, but we need you. Both of you. The galaxy believes in faces, not files. There was a pause, then Kael. Nyra. You didn't just expose a monster. You became a symbol. Don't let them rewrite it. The message ended. Kael sat quietly for a long time. The child curled beside him, sleeping. Nyra approached, her face unreadable. We go back, she said. It wasn't a question. Kael looked at the stars. If we do, there's no hiding anymore. There never was. He looked at her. What if they put us on trial? She gave a small smile. Then we testify. He sighed. I was never trained to stand on a podium. I was. Kael chuckled just once. Then he stood. Then let's go tell the galaxy why we refuse to keep killing. The journey back took 3 weeks. 3 long, quiet weeks of avoiding patrols, hacking relay lines, and walking through lands so ruined that even memories had fled. But something strange happened along the way. They weren't alone. At first it was a stranger who left clean water beside a supply cache. Then a farmer offered dried fruit and said nothing. Then a caravan of former medics who offered them passage for part of the way. Word had spread, not names, not details, just stories. Of a man and a woman walking the waste, of a child they carried, of the truth they refused to bury. By the time they reached the outer crater again, the resistance had changed. Stronger, more coordinated, more afraid. Thalyn greeted them personally. Her face was tired, but her eyes brightened at the sight of the boy. You made it. Kael nodded. Barely. We've secured a hearing with the core assembly, she said. Remote, but official. You'll be speaking live to all 12 sectors. Nyra's expression hardened. Are they expecting us to beg? No, Thalyn replied. They're expecting you to fail. Kael raised an eyebrow. Then we shouldn't disappoint them. They spent the night preparing. Nyra reviewed documents. Kael rehearsed what he'd say, and the child, he slept soundly, for the first time in weeks, like he knew that tomorrow his very existence would stand before the galaxy, not as a threat, but as proof. That love could be stronger than programming. That truth, even when buried under war and lies, could still bloom. And maybe they were no longer running. They were returning. The hearing began with silence. Not the kind born of peace, the kind born of rooms too large, voices too small, and histories too inconvenient to look at directly. 12 holograms shimmered above the dais, each one a representative of a sector too powerful to ever admit fault, too public to ignore what had gone viral. Kael stood at the center of the Resistance Outpost's repurposed command hall. He wore no uniform, no insignia, just a plain jacket, scuffed boots, and a child's warmth pressed lightly against his side. Nyra stood to his left, straight-backed and calm, her presence alone enough to draw murmurs across the channels. They weren't just standing trial, they were the trial. The moderator, a thin woman with eyes like polished glass, addressed them first. Kael Draven, Nyra Thalyn. You are here to respond to accusations regarding the unauthorized broadcast of classified Verani-Human War data, the possession of stolen military records, and the harboring of a bioengineered hybrid child. Do you understand the charges? Kael leaned toward the mic slightly. We do. And how do you plead? He looked at Nyra. She nodded. Guilty of exposing the truth, Kael said. Not sorry for it. One of the counselors scoffed. Another muted their feed. The moderator didn't flinch. Proceed with your testimony. Nyra went first. She spoke not as a soldier, but as someone who had once believed in the system. She described the order to purge the medical outpost, how she refused, how her own command left her to die in the flames she was supposed to ignite. Kael followed, recounting his days in Black Echo, the missions no one recorded, the targets that never made the news, the day he stepped out of the fire instead of deeper into it. Then they showed the files, all of them, names, coordinates, orders with Voss's signature, audio clips of military personnel laughing while marking civilian sectors for extermination. The gallery watched in silence. No one interrupted. No one could. The moderator finally spoke again. And the child, Nyra placed her hand gently on the boy's back. He stirred, then sat up, blinking slowly at the projection of faces staring down at him. He is not an experiment, she said. He is not a threat. He is the truth you've all been avoiding. Kael stepped forward. You want to know why people followed Voss? Because it was easier than facing the cost of peace. Because some of you believed that compromise was a weakness. He paused. But that boy is the future you keep saying you want. A future where species don't need to erase each other just to survive. A long silence followed. Then a counselor from the Terran Concord leaned forward. What do you propose we do? Kael looked at Nyra. She stepped up. Don't honor us. Don't build statues. Don't offer amnesty or parades. She pointed to the screen where a list of Voss's confirmed collaborators still scrolled. Just stop pretending this didn't happen. When the hearing ended, the moderator's voice trembled slightly. We will reconvene in 72 hours for formal response. Kael raised an eyebrow. You need 3 days to admit we were right. The moderator blinked. We need 3 days to figure out what to do about it. That at least was honest. Outside, the resistance greeted them with quiet reverence. No applause, just presence. A dozen hands reached out to touch Kael's shoulder, to grasp Nyra's arm. Not to congratulate, to connect. They were no longer ghosts. They were real. That night, the child sat between them near the fire. He stared into the flame with eyes too old for his face. Kael handed him a small metal chip. Voss's old command override decrypted now. You can keep it, he said. The boy tilted his head. It used to control people like me, Kael explained. Now it's just a reminder. The boy took it gently, said nothing. Nyra watched him with something close to awe. He didn't just survive, she said. He absorbed everything. The fear, the silence, the blood. And he's still here. Kael nodded. So are we. 3 days passed. The council's message came through on a secure channel. Short, not quite apology, not quite verdict, but clear. Sanctions against the Voss doctrine will begin immediately. All collaborators to be reviewed. The child is to be protected under interspecies accord. The witnesses, Kael Draven and Nyra Thalyn, are free citizens. Nyra raised an eyebrow. Free? Kael snorted. Funny word for people who haven't stopped running. Still, it was more than they expected, and far more than they thought they'd live to hear. But victory is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives in silence, in the absence of boots at the door, in the knowledge that just maybe fewer children would be born into war. Kael didn't celebrate. He went outside instead. Watched the stars. Felt the cold wind brush his face. Nyra joined him. She didn't speak. Neither did he. They just stood there shoulder to shoulder. The child slept inside under layers of warmth and peace no one had given them, only what they had carved out with blood and breath and bone. Kael finally broke the silence. What now? Nyra looked to the stars. Now we build something better. He tilted his head. Are you ready for that? She gave him a soft smile. I wasn't ready for any of this, but we still survived. He nodded. Then they turned and walked back inside. Not to rest, not yet, but to begin again. They didn't plan on staying, not forever, but forever had a way of sneaking up on people like them, people who weren't supposed to live this long, who had been trained to finish missions, not raise children. The resistance camp near the outer crater had grown in the weeks since the broadcast. What used to be a hidden cluster of tents and half-working consoles had turned into a hub. Engineers, medics, even ex-council staff were filtering in people who once served the machine, but had finally seen the gears grind too many innocents into silence, and somehow, without ever intending to, Kael and Nyra had become the center of it. They had no titles. They issued no orders. But when they spoke, people listened. Kyle spent his mornings out on the perimeter, teaching the younger ones how to move silently, how to spot drones before they spotted you. He didn't speak much, just demonstrated. That was enough. Nyra spent her afternoons in the communication dome coordinating subspace relays, building encryption protocols, sending fragments of testimony into the furthest reaches of the galaxy. She never smiled while she worked, but her hands moved faster than anyone else's. And the child, he began to laugh. Not often, not loudly, but sometimes when Kael made a joke at his own expense, or when Nyra stumbled over a bad Terran proverb, the boy would let out a sound small, high and bright. It pierced through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. They never asked his name. They never gave him one either. Somehow it felt wrong to define him too early, as if doing so would shape the story before it had the chance to breathe. For now he was just him, and he was enough. One morning as frost curled across the solar panels and the comm tower hissed with static, Kael received a message. Not encrypted, not threatening, just a plain relay from Sector 9. A school, a place for children who didn't fit the mold. Half-bloods, refugees, survivors. A quiet request. If he and Nyra were willing, the boy could have a place there. A real place. Books, clean floors, a bed that didn't shake when the wind blew. Kael brought it to Nyra that night. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the screen, lips pressed into a tight line. When she finally looked up, her eyes shimmered. Do you think he's ready? Kael hesitated, then nodded. I think he's more ready than we are. They told the boy together, sat on either side of him in the greenhouse dome, now rebuilt and glowing with new life. He listened, head tilted. Didn't speak, just leaned into Kael's side. Nyra placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to go, she said. But if you want to, Kael added, we'll take you there. Stay as long as you need. The boy blinked, then nodded. Just once. The journey took 2 days. They traveled in an old cargo hauler converted for atmosphere drift. It was loud, rusted, but functional. Kyle spent most of the trip watching the boy trace shapes on the window with his fingers. Nyra sat with a datapad on her lap, reading files about the school. Her hand never strayed far from the boys. When they arrived, the administrator greeted them at the gate. A gentle-eyed woman with synth scars across her scalp and a voice like softened gravel. He'll be safe here, she promised. Cal studied the walls. No weapons, just murals, handprints, drawings. He nodded. Nyra knelt to the boy's level. This doesn't mean goodbye. The boy looked at her, then at Kael. Will you come back? Kael crouched, met his eyes. Whenever you call, he said. And if I don't call, Kyle smiled. We'll come anyway. The boy blinked, then hugged them both, arms tight, no fear, just love. They walked away slowly, didn't look back until they reached the ridge. Then they turned. The boy was still at the gate waving, still watching, still smiling. Nyra's voice was soft. We did the right thing. Kyle nodded, then added almost under his breath, we gave the galaxy something it forgot it could have. They didn't go back to the camp, not immediately. Instead, they headed north, where the stars were cold and the winds still carried the scent of memory. Where ruins whispered and hope bloomed in cracks no one bothered to look at anymore. They didn't have a mission now, no orders, no deadline. Just two people walking side by side, making space for something new. And maybe that was the whole point. They reached the edge of the old cities just as the second sun began to rise. These weren't cities anymore, just skeletal towers leaning into the sky like forgotten prayers. Concrete cracked by vines, steel overgrown with wind and silence. Every step they took stirred up dust that hadn't been touched in years. Kael paused near the base of an old metro line, crouched to run his fingers across graffiti scrawled in both human standard and Verani glyphs. It said only one word. Enough. He stared at it for a long time. Nyra stood behind him, arms folded. I think this is where it started, she said. He looked back at her. The resistance. She shook her head. No. The doubt. The whispers. The moment people realized the war wasn't what they were told it was, Kael straightened up. Funny place for a revelation. Truth usually is. They stayed in the ruin for 3 days, longer than they expected. There were no threats, no drones, no soldiers hunting them, but also no transmissions, no questions, no news. The silence felt intentional, not hostile, just waiting, like the world was watching what they'd do next. On the second night, Nyra found an old archive node buried beneath a collapsed library. Powered by a solar backup that had somehow clung to function, it blinked to life with a faint hum. Inside were fragments, messages, journal entries from people who had lived through the last days of the war. Not soldiers, civilians, mechanics, gardeners, children. One video caught her attention. A young Verani girl, maybe 12, sitting in a cracked doorway. "My father says humans have fire in their voices," she said, "that they burn everything they touch. But I saw a man today give his coat to a dying Tharn beast, even though he was freezing. Maybe fire isn't just destruction. Maybe it's warmth." Nyra let the video play 3 times. Then she copied it to a new crystal. Kael stood nearby watching her. "You're collecting sparks," he said. She nodded. "If we don't, who will?" The next morning, Kael found a transmitter buried near the train platform. It was old, unregistered, but functional. He wired it to their portable uplink. "What are you doing?" Nyra asked. He didn't look up. "Starting something." He tapped the broadcast key. The red light blinked. Live. Kael's voice was low, calm, no rehearsal. "This is Kael Draven, former Black Echo operative, speaking not to governments, not to alliances, but to anyone who still listens." He paused. "I used to follow orders, ones that ended families, ones that made people disappear. Then I stopped. I wasn't brave, just tired of being afraid of the silence that came afterward." He exhaled slowly. "There's a child now, alive, hybrid, proof that we don't have to destroy what we don't understand. Proof that hate is taught, not born." Another pause. "I don't care if you remember my name. I don't care if they erase me again. But if you're hearing this and you've ever wondered if standing down matters, it does." He ended the broadcast. No dramatic finish, just truth. Just. For the first time in months, Nyra saw something in his face she hadn't seen since the day she'd woken up in that dome. Peace. They resumed walking, north still, toward the old relay fields where no one dared settle. Not for war, for memory. They wanted to map what had been lost, not for glory, not for rebellion, just so someone would know what came before, what was broken, and what could still be rebuilt. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the broken sky, Nyra asked quietly, "Do you think the boy will remember us?" Kael didn't answer right away. He watched the wind curl through the wreckage of a shattered memorial, a statue long decapitated, its pedestal scorched clean. Then he said he won't have to, because the world will. The wind carried no voices here, only echoes, soft, fading, and free. Kael and Nyra stood atop the final ridge, as dawn cracked the sky open like an old scar. Below them, across the valley, rose the place no maps bothered to name anymore. A flat stretch of stone and moss marked by nothing but stillness. It was the last unmarked space, and it was perfect. They didn't speak as they worked. Kael laid the foundation, stacking stones with deliberate care. Nyra sorted through the archive, crystal-selecting fragments, videos, voice clips, written logs, all tucked into a waterproof capsule and sealed inside a steel tube. They buried it beneath the stone platform. No flag, no plaque, no names, only memory. When they were done, they stepped back and looked at what they had built. 2 simple figures carved into stone. One human, one Verani. Not soldiers, not statues of victory or conquest. Just standing, together, side by side. A boy had drawn them back at the school months ago. Kael had kept the sketch in his pocket ever since. Now it was carved here forever. They sat beside the memorial as the sun rose. No crowd, no broadcast, just the warmth of the light touching their faces. Kael broke the silence. "This is it." Nyra nodded. "No more running, no more hiding." She looked at him, eyes soft. "No more killing." He smiled. That too. The wind passed over them again. This time it didn't feel empty. It felt full, like somewhere 1,000 quiet rebellions had just begun. Somewhere across the stars, a teacher played a file to her class. The girl from the Verani doorway, the one who said fire could be warmth. Children listened, some cried, some just sat still, but all of them understood. Not because they were told to, because someone had shown them. In time, the story spread, not as propaganda, not as gospel, just a memory passed hand to hand of two people who could have been killed and chose instead to build. They never returned to the cities, not because they weren't welcome, but because their purpose had been served. They had left something behind. Not a legacy, not a legend, just a seed, and that was enough. The stars above them blinked in silence. Kael watched the last of the sun spill across the horizon like gold poured from a broken vessel. His fingers traced the edge of the stone memorial. No words, no symbols, just form, just shape, just memory. Beside him, Nyra leaned back, her arms folded behind her head, gaze lost to the constellations. "I think we did it," she whispered. Kael glanced at her. "What broke the pattern?" He didn't respond, but he smiled. A small, tired, true smile. The kind that says maybe this time the fire will build homes instead of burning them. A light breeze rolled over the ridge, rustling the moss that had already begun to grow along the edge of the stone. Life sneaking back into forgotten corners, as it always does. Below, the valley stretched endlessly, a canvas, not empty, just waiting. They didn't talk about the future, didn't try to name it, didn't pretend to own it. They just sat in the stillness, wrapped in its possibilities. No longer fugitives, no longer soldiers, just two souls who had chosen not to become monsters. And in a galaxy that had forgotten how to stop fighting, that choice was louder than any war. The wind shifted once more. Lighter, like a breath being held, finally released.